Today we are going to be discussing and studying Confucius's famous classical work, the Analects. We should now be covering and exploring the second chapter or section. The second chapter is Wei Zheng on government. Here, when it comes to the Wei Zheng chapter, the word Zheng, government, can also be interpreted as Confucius's fundamental political thought, or perhaps it was essentially a comprehensive political philosophy, because this particular Chinese character, Zheng, has many different meanings, including, for example, concepts like self-governance, personal cultivation, and governing or leading others effectively. Like Master Yu once indeed put it, it is quite similar to the fundamental idea of benefiting oneself and benefiting others, so it can also carry that particular meaning. And as for the word zheng, government, here it also refers to the correct zheng, uprightness or correctness. The word zheng, as in correctness, also shares similarities here. Of course, if we carefully look at the comprehensive content of the entire text, it clearly outlines for a ruler as a guiding monarch how to effectively govern one's own sovereign country, and furthermore, how to judiciously manage the various social groups and diverse communities that fall under one's authoritative rule. If we understand it from this perspective, that is also completely and entirely valid. So it might be quite different from the contemporary and modern concepts of politics and economics. These fundamental concepts should have certainly come into existence much later, precisely because the prevailing circumstances and conditions of society have significantly changed and evolved over time. Many of the words that we commonly use in our daily lives today were probably created by later generations according to the specific needs of our current era, the fundamental and evolving needs of our society, and these concepts were subsequently invented, or more accurately, meticulously compiled and developed over time. That's another way to precisely articulate it. This is particularly relevant because our current and widely accepted concept of politics is actually fundamentally about the management and governance of a specific region or an entire country, and also encompasses the oversight of diverse groups of people, including all their multifaceted activities and interactions, and the effective management of many diverse forms of social organization. So it's essentially a kind of method, a kind of means. This is what we call politics. So, at that particular historical juncture, zheng should also be considered a fundamental and essential means of governing the world. Therefore, how precisely should we understand this significant and intricate means? There are also various different chapters about this further below. In the first chapter here it says, "To govern with virtue is like the steadfast and guiding North Star, which shines brightly and provides a point of reference, which stays in its place while all the other stars revolve around it." If we look at the very literal meaning here, as a ruler, a monarch indeed, it should fundamentally be through moral principles and ethical standards that a ruler governs and administers his entire country and nation. A leader should consistently use moral virtue and righteousness to win over and inspire all of his people and citizens. To use a descriptive metaphor to elucidate this concept, it's like the guiding North Star, always there. In the north, there is a prominent star commonly known as the North Star. This North Star remains completely unmoved, its guiding light, dwelling and residing there peacefully among the countless stars, among the vast multitude of brilliant stars in the sky, but all the surrounding stars continuously revolve and orbit around it in perpetual motion. So what this really means is that as a ruler, as a monarch, if his profound wisdom and his genuine benevolence, or rather, if his exceptional virtue is remarkably and undeniably outstanding, shining brightly, if his personal conduct is truly exemplary and is in every way beyond any reproach, then his loyal and devoted people who stood by him through thick and thin will naturally and wholeheartedly respect, diligently serve, and steadfastly support him. He will be fully and comprehensively capable of effectively governing the entire world. Just as the wise Mencius once profoundly stated, "He who truly wins the hearts of the people ultimately wins the world." If he manages to win and capture the hearts of the people, then actually gaining control of the entire world and achieving ultimate power poses absolutely no problem whatsoever for him. However, if his methods and behavioral approaches are wrong and misguided, then that is, speaking from a short-term perspective, perhaps he might resort to using some form of forceful coercion instead, using extremely violent and oppressive means to govern his country. But when the crucial time comes, all the people may rise up in resistance and resist. There is definitely this kind of danger and risk involved in such approaches. So the analogy that he uses here is also talking about being just like the North Star in the sky. When we examine this from a broader historical perspective and viewpoint, or as the ancients profoundly believed, its steadfast presence is unwavering. In the land of Tibet, many young people also reverently say that the North Star, shining brightly in the northern sky, serves as an eternal and silent witness to them. In Han Chinese culture, it's like making a solemn vow, like swearing by the mountains and seas, to express a certain unwavering and deep commitment, using it as a reliable witness. There are indeed such practices and methods that have been employed as well. However, in reality, this prominent star located in the northern sky is not completely unmoving. It does, in fact, exhibit a noticeable shift over time. However, this movement, compared to the surrounding stars, which are much brighter, can be considered relatively fixed. Because if we look at it from the perspective of modern science, actually, all the stars in the sky are subject to movement. None are truly stationary. As for this particular star, we often talk about the well-known Big Dipper constellation, which is quite prominent. In the north, there is a group of stars shaped like a ladle, composed of 7 prominent stars, and using this, the very last star at the bend of the ladle, which is also known as the handle, if you draw a straight line from it. Among the celestial bodies, there is one particularly bright star that stands out. This is called the North Star, or Polaris. The North Star, generally speaking, including practices like fortune-telling, divination, and physiognomy. Many people are quite familiar and well acquainted with these particular stars and stellar constellations in the night sky. So, regarding the Big Dipper constellation specifically in our Tibetan region and areas in the past, since we didn't have watches, clocks, or any timepieces available to us, at very night, for example, when we were young, if we were watching over the yaks at all times and sleeping in the open air at night, then we wouldn't really know when it would get light. But when the Big Dipper slowly, and in the end it completely disappeared behind the majestic mountains, it truly meant that the dawn of a new day was not far off. There is also a star called the Morning Star, and when the Morning Star appeared the early morning, it would be daylight very soon indeed thereafter. So generally, many stars in the sky have different names. When I was young and went to herd yaks, I would often use this method. When I went to herd yaks at night, we would use the stars to tell the time. Then during the day when the sun was out, we would use the sun's shadow to tell the time. For example, when we went out to herd yaks in the morning, we would have to come back in the afternoon. But when coming back, we couldn't return too early, because if we came back too early, the yaks would run out again, which would be troublesome. If we came back too late, it would already be quite pitch dark by the time we eventually got back home, and we wouldn't be able to see the road. So generally, when we went out to herd cattle at that time, it would be to places about 2 or 3 kilometers away. There was no grass nearby, so we had to go farther out. Then when it was time to come back, we had to check the time. We would see how things were going. And when checking the time, if the sun was out, we would look at the shadow of a mountain or a tree. And when the shadow reached a certain spot, if we set out from there, we would know where we should be by then. Sometimes there was no sun, like on cloudy days. On cloudy days, we didn't really know what to do. Sometimes if we felt a bit hungry, we would use that to judge the time. Other times, we would quite regularly and always recite mantras. When we set out in the morning, we would recite 20,000 mantras every day. By the time we reached 18,000, we would have a rough idea of the time. I can't remember exactly now, but back then, since we couldn't see the sun and didn't have a watch, we still had to be fairly accurate with the timing. So in that case, if we use the number of mantras recited to tell the time, we could basically be certain and completely sure of it. Nowadays, many contemporary kids and young people would probably think this sounds like someone talking in their sleep, perhaps even uttering nonsensical phrases, that it's impossible. Back then, we truly didn't possess any watches. During the daylight hours and throughout the entire night, we relied entirely upon this particular kind of estimation. We also utilized other methods as crucial reference points, you see. At that time, I felt that many of the countless stars twinkling brightly in the vast night sky were probably very important for ancient people traveling at night, or for those who didn't have any other reliable way to accurately tell the time. They were still quite important. Many elders had their own ways of observing the stars in the sky. Each had different observations, because by looking at the stars, they could say, oh, this year the crops might not do well, or this year there might be disasters. Even when observing the clouds in the sky, it was a common belief that if there were red clouds visible in the early morning, it was a definite sign and strong indication that it would rain later on that very same day. Similarly, if there were red clouds or a beautifully glowing sunset painting the evening sky, then it truly meant that the weather would be very hot and sweltering the very next day. It most definitely wouldn't rain at all the following day. And if you saw certain distinct shapes of clouds in the north, it meant that something significant would happen there during the following year. Some of these might just be folk legends or traditional beliefs, but some of them were actually quite accurate and remarkably reliable. Back in the early 1970s, in my hometown of Luhuo, there was a very serious and devastating earthquake. But the year just before that, there was a precursor. Every single time there was a rather curved cloud formation in the western sky. Many of the elders would say, oh, maybe there will be a disaster next year. You see, in that particular place, certain distinct shapes of clouds would often appear. I was very young at the time, so I often heard this story. I thought, what nonsense are these old people talking about? How could you figure these things out just by looking at the clouds in the sky? But sure enough, the next year there really was an earthquake. A lot of people died. So sometimes when it comes to the wisdom of the ancients, even though they might not have the same things we do now, they might not know how to use cell phones or computers, and they might not understand scientific principles, but they carefully observed the intricate and vast workings of the heaven and earth, and noticed certain changes throughout spring, summer, autumn, and winter. Relying on these changes, they deduced some worldly fortunes and misfortunes, or certain specific rules. This is something that we simply cannot ignore either. So sometimes when it comes to people who have been through life, or some of the elderly around us, you shouldn't think, this person is uneducated just because I went to college and he didn't finish elementary school. You should not look down on him. In fact, maybe he has a certain kind of wisdom that far surpasses your own. He might even possess a much deeper understanding of life than you do. In this particular regard, we should never underestimate anyone at all. So what exactly are we going to discuss next? If we consider and utilize morality as a fundamental form of societal restraint, then it logically follows that everyone within that society will become obedient to its principles. If there aren't such guiding moral frameworks or principles in place, then what happens? If he has some cruel behaviors, then the people around him will also be affected by it, and will also suffer immensely and profoundly, especially some notorious tyrants, truly cruel rulers, and utterly evil kings throughout history. The sheer terror and profound fear they inflicted upon others was undeniably and truly terrifying to behold. There is a significant Buddhist scripture, specifically called the Mahasamanyagama Sutra. It mentions here, if a king commits evil deeds, his anger will blind him to the truth. That if some kings continuously commit evil deeds and act out of pure hatred without truly seeing the complete truth of the situation at hand, his actions frighten all living beings, even his own parents fear him. Then their malevolent and destructive actions bring profound terror and immense suffering to all sentient beings, including even their very own parents and innocent, vulnerable children, and are often filled with an overwhelming sense of fear and profound dread. That should absolutely be the case, right? Sometimes we, as individuals or as a collective, whether it's the powerful ruler of an entire country or the influential leader of a significant group or organization, their actions make many people below them feel uneasy and anxious or even extremely worried and fearful as they struggle to cope with the uncertainty and stress caused by such behavior, lacking any profound or lasting sense of security or stability. So when it comes to the myriad joys and profound sufferings that are experienced throughout the world in the human condition, they are also caused by people, created by human actions. If people encounter someone especially frightening, such a person brings terror to everyone around them or sows seeds of doubt. All kinds of situations like this are truly evident, and everyone can clearly see this now from the various situations unfolding in different regions around the world, from the circumstances in various countries. It's very clear and easy to see as well. On the other hand, if we look at it from the opposite perspective, if our monarchs, for example, are not only wise but also compassionate, demonstrating genuine care and understanding for their people, then their benevolent rule would bring immense happiness and widespread well-being to everyone within their realm, fostering a harmonious and prosperous society, and a sense of security as well. In the past, Sima Qian spoke about Yao of the Yao, Shun, and Yu era. At that time, and in the records of the grand historian, it is also mentioned, benevolent as heaven, wise as the divine. That his profound benevolence and boundless compassion were as truly vast as the sky itself. able to embrace everything. And his wisdom was truly like that of an immortal being, knowing everything. Indeed, nothing was beyond his comprehension. Near him like sunlight, distant like clouds. He was praised very highly and extensively, indeed highly regarded in these particular respects. Being close to him was like basking in sunlight, and seeing him was like looking at clouds in the sky, so dignified and majestic. There were many such descriptions. So in our world, there truly are some people who rely on his prestige, on his truly dignified and noble appearance, or his profoundly compassionate and understanding words, or his deeply caring and selfless actions toward all beings, which had the remarkable ability to genuinely move and profoundly inspire everyone he encountered, leaving a lasting positive impact. We have a concept called governing by non-action. The ancients often like to use the idea of governing by non-action. When it comes to governing by non-action, he himself might not necessarily need to actively do a great deal, but by profoundly relying on his inherent merit and profound virtue and his considerable and well-established prestige, he could effectively command and significantly influence absolutely everyone around him. So, for rulers, therefore, they should solely and inherently rely on their own personal morality, be it through merit or wisdom, to influence and inspire those around them in this way, which is also very good. Otherwise, if one uses especially cruel and truly harsh means and harms the bodies and minds of other living beings, if one acts in such a way, in fact, actually, this kind of a particular cause and condition will bring bitter consequences to oneself. It is very harmful. So, although each of us is not a ruler of a nation, as we mentioned when discussing the profound discourse on the teachings for rulers, a significant and influential text, everyone may at some point in their lives have the distinct opportunity or the necessary conditions to be a leader, guiding others or making important decisions. When you are leading, whether it's 10 people, 8 people, or 100 people, or 1,000 people, during the time you are in a leadership position, you should use your own virtue, your own wisdom, and your own deep compassion to truly help others. You should always regard yourself as someone who serves the wider public, and having this kind of mindset is very good. But many of us, as soon as we take up a position, immediately feel superior and above everyone else, and don't take anyone seriously at all. Actually, as a leader, this is certainly not a good attitude to have. As soon as they take on the position, they immediately and completely change. Before they had this position, when people don't have high status or position, they are very peaceful, compassionate, and kind-hearted. When interacting with others during those times, relationships become particularly easy and natural to maintain. But once they rise to power, they become arrogant and disregard others. They just stop paying attention to anyone else around them. They only ever just always think about themselves. Such a person is certainly not a truly successful ruler. So, from the broader perspective of effective management, from a comprehensive management standpoint, it really relies heavily on this particular kind of metaphor. It's like the North Star, which itself remains unmoved. But because of its inherent and natural authority within the vast universe and its own undeniable sense of majestic grandeur, the surrounding celestial stars continuously revolve around it in a perpetual cosmic dance. Some people, they never step down and always remain as true and enduring leaders because they have the merit and the right conditions. This is a kind of recognition from everyone, and also everyone's trust and confidence in him. Many of us, after being elected to office, when it's our first time to speak, we say, since everyone has chosen me, I truly know it's a significant sign of trust from others. So since you all genuinely trust me, I will do my very best to live up to your expectations and commitment. I won't let you down. I will definitely do my best. But after some time, who knows what will happen? There are all kinds of situations. So here, the first thing we talked about is this kind of management philosophy from Confucius. You could put it that way. Next, in chapter 2, it's also Confucius said, the 300 poems, if summed up in one phrase, it would be no evil thoughts. Here, poems refers to the Book of Songs, specifically the 300 Odes, a collection of ancient poems in the revered Book of Songs. So, regarding the Book of Songs with its 300 poems, actually in the history, the Book of Songs is said to have originally contained more than 3,000 different poems and verses, but later it was said that Confucius compiled and edited them into 305 songs or poems. It was Confucius who organized and arranged them this way. Therefore, Confucius had tremendous authority and credibility to speak on these matters. What is the central theme of the 300 Odes in the Book of Songs? He summarized it. If we ask what kind of main idea it indeed conveys, he certainly has the full authority to explain this principle. The Book of Songs is actually also a comprehensive historical text and important document, and it is also an authoritative and highly influential book in classical Chinese literature and culture. The content and material within it should be said to span and cover the entire period from the beginning of the Western Zhou dynasty all the way through to the spring and autumn period and continuing into the Warring States era. In terms of its time span, it ranges from roughly the 11th century BC to the 6th century BC. It's a history spanning roughly 500 to 600 years. In terms of geographical scope, it also stretches from south to north and should include many, if not most, of the various states that existed at that particular time in history. As for the content of the Book of Songs, it is said to be all-encompassing. It encompasses poetry, the daily life of that particular time, and captivating musical rhythms, as well as various plants, diverse animals, and even the profound thoughts of ancient people. Because back then, those who were literate or had culture were actually quite few in number. Many individuals and groups relied heavily on various traditional performing arts to sing praises and express their admiration. There was a notable scholar who, when meticulously writing about Confucius, specifically said, Confucius, because when he was young, he was always with his mother, and when he was with his mother primarily studied rituals and as well as sacrifices. So because of this, she probably had a good singing voice. Confucius himself also deeply loved to sing. In the Analects, specifically in the 7th chapter, it is also mentioned that when others sang, he genuinely enjoyed singing along, and some of Confucius's profound lyrics and musical rhythms, indeed, these were all things he could compose on the spot. So, in this collection of poems, it already reflected the social phenomena of that particular time. Many phenomena of that era, indeed, were already described quite clearly. Therefore, the Book of Songs should be considered a very famous, historically significant, and culturally important collection, work that covers all aspects, including culture, religion, as well as the customs and folk traditions of the time, and so on. All of these important details are contained within this comprehensive book. So what exactly is the content of this particular book? In fact, all the content presented in here, if we put it concisely and sum it up in a simple sentence, what would it be? It is thoughts without evil. Some commentaries say that when we talk about the 300 poems in the Book of Songs, it's not necessarily a fixed number. This 300 refers to the majority. In other words, if you summarize the majority of the content in the Book of Songs, what is it all about? It is thoughts without evil. Of course, this phrase, thoughts without evil, has different annotations. And some scholars have different interpretations. As for the word thoughts here, a few scholars, when interpreting it, explain it as thought or thinking. So what is the profound meaning summarized from all the 300 odes? It is that our thoughts must never be biased or swayed by prejudice. One must definitely be upright and righteous, honest and straightforward, without any distortion or deviation. One must absolutely have righteousness and purity, genuine innocence and sincerity. If one's thoughts and mindset are correct and proper, then his behavior will also be good, and whatever he expresses or communicates, all his politics and so on, all of these will be entirely without error. There will indeed be no mistakes whatsoever. This is precisely how it is explained. But there are also some explanations that the so-called thought, si, doesn't have a direct meaning. It's actually a modal particle. The most important part is the phrase without evil at the end, and this concept is very crucial. What is the reason for this? Because in the Book of Songs, it states and mentions that first comes thoughts without evil, followed by sima si chu, thinking of horses departing. Later on, it's always sima si chu. So what does this mean? It means that the road cannot be crooked. The road should always be perfectly straight. When the road stretches out perfectly straight, when you are riding a magnificent horse upon its smooth surface, and the horse is heading directly toward its intended destination, it then moves forward along the defined path without making any discernible mistakes or deviations whatsoever. In this way, the phrase sima sishu that comes after it actually doesn't possess a direct or immediately obvious meaning in isolation. The earlier term, without evil, simply and clearly means a road without any deviation, indicating a perfectly straight and true path. And then, the horses that diligently follow this unswerving road are also traveling along this path. Maybe if we put it this way, it should be more accurate, because according to what precisely follows after, that is, specifically according to the content of the Book of Songs itself, this is probably even more correct. So then what does this mean? From a worldly perspective, the entire meaning of the Book of Songs is without deviation. We should always be upright and righteous regardless of what we are doing or whatever activities we engage in. We must have the determination and commitment to completely eliminate and cut off all evil practices, negative influences, and harmful methods, whether in our thoughts and mindset or in our behaviors and actions. Evil knowledge and wrong views and the like these are all kinds of truly heretical and profoundly misguided ideas. As for evil in our world, it is certainly not the right path. It should unequivocally be considered a kind of deeply perverse behavior. It is better to break moral rules or the precepts than to destroy correct understanding. In the 400 verses, it is mentioned that from the perspective of spiritual practice, it is truly better to break the precepts than to have very incorrect views. Our understanding must indeed be correct. We must not develop wrong views. If we do not give rise to wrong views and our understanding is correct, then even if the precepts are broken, there can be opportunities and chances for redemption and making amends. Therefore, people in this world and earthly realm must definitely be righteous and upright, never evil or corrupt. If one follows along the wrong path and evil way, life truly becomes very dangerous indeed. However, in our society today, especially when it comes to certain specific commercial products and many of the entertainment ideas that are found online, the entertainment guidance and recommendations, and the overall content that is readily available, most of them have a profoundly corrupting influence on our minds. Indeed, many are toxic and polluting. This is quite a common occurrence, especially for many children nowadays. From a very young age, they are exposed to violent and disturbing content, pornographic and fighting or killing content. This is indeed a very dangerous and concerning phenomenon, but it is proving to be very difficult to effectively stop. This is also something that people should pay close attention to, especially during the formative years of childhood. When a child's entire brain and mind are not yet mature or fully developed, at this time, he spends all day watching things where he cannot distinguish between reality and illusion, between what is real and what is fake. If such concepts and ideas are continuously implanted and reinforced, then when he grows up, they will be utterly unable to distinguish many crucial aspects of the real world. Why is it that so many young people today seem to be profoundly disconnected from real life, just like what is vividly described in the acclaimed film Inception? When it comes to the illusory virtual world, many of them truly cannot really tell the significant difference. In this particular case, how can their fundamental values be properly established? Maybe we're meddling too much, but perhaps we are genuinely concerned about the fundamental values of many young people in the future to come, because from a very young age, most of their precious time is spent almost entirely within the vast virtual world online. For this significant reason, I've heard that many young children, especially young people, are not at all concerned about suicide and aren't really afraid of it, because ever since they were young in the online world, they've seen too much of this kind of thing in their world. With this kind of phenomenon, after a certain point, they become numb to it themselves. They can't really distinguish between real life and the virtual world. They often have significant trouble discerning the subtle differences between things. So what exactly is this particular item? I've talked about this in other classes before, because there are many business people who all have various and diverse motives. In order to attract the vast majority of adults, as well as some children and even young adolescents, they specifically study their psychology. They conduct special research, and after investigating, they know what kind of animal worlds children like and what kind of cartoons they prefer, those without any values. There are some animated cartoons and visual media like this. So from a very young age, children are constantly and deeply immersed in this kind of imaginative world, being continually influenced, shaped, and molded. By the time they grow up, their outlook on life has also become like this. Then in real life, when they encounter some troubles or pain, at that moment, they end up following some of the behaviors from movies and TV shows and have no other choice but to use them. If they do, for their entire life, for the whole path and duration of their life, they will be significantly impacted. There is basically no hope left. At that point, they feel especially sad and hopeless, but there's absolutely nothing they can truly do. Sometimes when people reach this particular point in their life, this highway, life is very much like a highway. Sometimes, if you genuinely want to turn back, you simply can't go back anymore. If you try to turn back, it's indeed very dangerous. You can only keep going forward along this path. Therefore, without evil is extremely important and significant. All the essential core ideas and fundamental thoughts of the 300 songs in the Book of Songs should be said to center around this concept of without evil. Whether it's our education or our spiritual practice, everything should move toward the right path. If you follow the right path, even if you don't go very fast, you are still making progress, even if your progress is slow. As long as your direction is absolutely correct, it's very much like us as practitioners. If at the very beginning you unfortunately rely on the completely wrong teacher, then you will face significant challenges. If the Dharma or practice that one cultivates and follows is wrong and incorrect, then everything else becomes wrong as well. We Tibetan people call this condition or state. Our Tibetan alphabet starts with ga, ka, ga, a. We say you can't make a mistake from the first ga. If you make a mistake from the first ga, everything will be wrong. It's like starting with the English alphabet. If you start with A, you can't get it wrong. If you make a mistake from A, then in the very end, everything will inevitably be wrong. That's precisely why this idea of without evil, whether it's in education, spiritual practice, or whatever it is that you ultimately do, the most absolutely fundamental direction or path must not be mistaken. Of course, during our spiritual practice and journey, will we inevitably encounter various obstacles, suffering, and significant difficulties? These are things we are bound to face, but this does not mean we are on the wrong path. If we start off on the wrong path from the beginning, then that is very dangerous. Life is very much the same way in many respects. If you start off on the wrong path from the very beginning, then there's absolutely no way to ever truly turn back at all. This is something that applies to everyone as well. I think, why did Confucius say that all of his profound teachings ultimately come down to just two essential words, without evil or no deviation? Actually, this particular principle is extremely important and holds significant weight in our spiritual practice, especially in cultivating right view. What exactly is right view based upon? It is carefully maintained through right knowledge and right mindfulness. So, among all the profound teachings in Buddhism, the first thing is to establish right view. Right view of cause and effect, right view of samsara, and the Madhyamaka right view. It is always emphasized that right view is very important. If there is no truly right view, then any spiritual practice and any attainment are completely out of the question. Therefore, from the very beginning, we should always endeavor to enter the correct and proper right path. This is indeed extremely important. Next, we will now come to the third and final chapter, which comprehensively says, when others ask what the main content and central theme of the 300 songs in the Book of Songs is, the answer can be summarized in just two words: without evil. If other people do not accept or acknowledge this interpretation, well, this is what Confucius himself said and taught. Confucius was the one who compiled the 300 odes of the Book of Songs. What right do you have to comment on it? In that particular case, we can confidently say what precisely is the profound essence of the 400 verses of the Middle Way, encapsulated in a single concise phrase. We would unequivocally say it is also indeed the right view. You could certainly put it in that particular way, couldn't you? Next, we come to another significant point, which is also something that the esteemed Confucius himself articulated and shared with the world. Guide them with government policies, regulate them with punishments and laws, and the people will avoid wrongdoing but have no sense of shame. What he is saying here is that if we use political decrees and governmental commands, or if we use politics to guide and lead people, or to instruct and educate the masses, you should use politics to govern or to instruct people, and if they make mistakes, use punishment to regulate them, use punishment to discipline them. Then, what would the eventual result truly be? What in the end would be the outcome of such an approach? These people might actually avoid guilt, or might not commit crimes, you see, because they're all afraid after all. One approach is to first use relatively coercive and forceful policies to begin managing and governing them. And then, when they make mistakes or commit wrongdoings, there are also particularly frightening and severe punishments and penalties to carry out the disciplinary measures and corrections. In this particular way, perhaps they will not make any significant mistakes, but it ultimately turns them into individuals who are completely shameless. Because in our world, there's a saying, the higher-ups have policies, the lower-downs have countermeasures. When those above impose strict rules, then those below may not genuinely accept it deep within their hearts, but they certainly don't dare to openly resist or challenge it. And then the people below end up doing many things that break the rules, things that are shameless, even though it might go against their own conscience or violate their own rules and regulations. But there's nothing they can do about it. Because when it truly comes to these kinds of coercive actions, absolutely no one is willing to accept them. Everyone is like this. If something is unreasonable, it's hard for anyone to accept it. In the standards for being a good student and child, it also says, if you subdue people by force, their hearts not be convinced. Only by reason can you silence objections. If you use your power to force others to obey your will and desires, your commands, on the surface, they may have no choice but to accept it, because they don't have the power to resist. They truly have no other choice but to reluctantly accept it. But in reality, deep down inside, they are still feeling very unhappy and discontented. If you convince people with reason, then the other person will be left speechless and have no choice but to accept it. Of course, whether or not the other person is reasonable, if the other person is unreasonable, no matter how much reasoning you present to them, they will still be like that. So sometimes when we encounter truly unreasonable people, explaining things logically to them is not as effective as just giving them a good firm beating with a stick. In that particular case, it might actually be a bit better and more practical. In the past, in our Tibetan region, there was a saying, for people who are especially foolish, citing scriptural evidence is not as effective as using a stick. The teachings and evidence from Buddhist scriptures cannot exceed the effect of beating him with a stick. If you beat him with a stick, he immediately becomes afraid and scared. But if you try to reason with him and explain things logically to him, in that case, they just become more and more unreasonable. Some people really are just unreasonable. Maybe it's because sentient beings have different karmic tendencies. There's a bit of a difference here as well. He himself thinks he's in the right, but in reality he doesn't reason at all. People like this, I don't know, whether it's due to differences in their channels, winds and essences, or something else. Why are you laughing? Sometimes among people, when you interact with a lot of people, there really are many different kinds of people. Whether it's their core values, because most people might be on the very same path, and that's okay. And then everyone's values are relatively similar. But there are a few individuals who truly believe that this is the way it is, and their intelligence and learning are actually quite good. But this kind of thing about them, perhaps the very way the channels within their body are structured, is indeed a little bit different, quite unique and distinct. Their breath in many ways might be a bit different too. When we don't interact with them, they all seem exactly the same. But in actual reality, each and every single person, if you spend some significant amount of time with them, you realize you can know a person's face but not their heart. Then gradually you slowly come to realize, wow, so this is what this person is like. There are still many differences. And in principle, fundamentally they are different. So nowadays, for many people, whether it's when they first set their initial intention, or perhaps when they are just beginning to consider their goals, or at the very beginning, everyone can still get along. But after some time passes, of who started with good intentions can no longer get along. The main reasons for not getting along, for some, it be cultural differences. For others, differences in values, and for some, habitual tendencies, past lives. I think the most important reason is the different habitual tendencies from past lives. Because of their different habitual tendencies, in the very end, it's truly very hard for them to stay together. Even within a short period of time, it's truly difficult, almost impossible, to even share a simple meal together with others. This kind of challenging situation frequently happens. What exactly was I talking about just now? I clearly got off track, didn't I? So how exactly do I just get back now? Sometimes when you're driving, you end up going really far away. And then when you try to return, you truly do not know the way back home. Of course, what I actually mean to ask is, should we endeavor to persuade people with sound reason or with sheer force alone? Actually, convincing people with reason is very good. But when you convince people with reason, beings with strong karmic tendencies, beings with especially powerful karma, it's difficult to persuade them with reason, because the common logic for everyone, to them, is actually considered illogical, you know? So in this particular case, it's very difficult to truly convince them. There is absolutely nothing you can effectively do. Therefore, for some individuals, this kind of challenging situation does indeed exist. In that specific case, if you attempt to utilize political maneuvering or some kind of overtly high-pressure tactics, It is indeed very difficult to make them obey and follow instructions. However, if you guide them with the utmost virtue and regulate their conduct with proper propriety, they will develop a sense of shame for their misdeeds and subsequently become upright individuals. Furthermore, if we use morality as a fundamental principle to discipline and educate them, and also to effectively utilize the principles of etiquette to foster a sense of unity and cohesion among individuals, then, on one hand, they will undoubtedly experience a profound sense of shame and will be deterred from acting recklessly or without due consideration. They will still have a profound sense of remorse, a deep feeling of regret for their actions. On the other hand, they will also possess what is commonly called uprightness. Some individuals interpret uprightness as a form of submission, or they come to fully understand and internalize established norms and rules. Because in long past ancient times, people were perhaps very thoughtful and rational, and truly empathetic and understanding. If I use morality to guide them and propriety to instruct them, because during that period of time, morality and proper etiquette were universally regarded by everyone as something especially good and highly commendable indeed. If we just really approach it this way, then on one hand, everyone still values a sense of shame, and everyone truly values rules and order. In this way, people won't act recklessly. Of course, this may indeed need to be combined with other relevant things. As for our current society, if we rely entirely on reason and morality, it might be very difficult for most ordinary people. So, as we often say, combining strict rules with humaneness and morality, and also with compassion, this approach is also very good. Otherwise, if there is no morality at all, and everything is done purely according to the law, that is also somewhat difficult. Some people say that Western countries with legal systems are also very good. Of course, in countries governed by the rule of law, when everything is measured entirely by law, there is no consideration for people's intentions or feelings. And whether it's punishment or making decisions, it's done directly according to the law. But in some Western countries, this law and legal system has also become something particularly ridiculous and laughable. Why do we say this? For example, in some countries and nations, when they engage in lawsuits and legal proceedings, there are two people. One is poor and the other is rich. If the person is rich, they have money, and they can certainly afford to hire very powerful and influential lawyers. After hiring these lawyers and going to court, if poor people cannot afford to hire one, then in that case, whatever this lawyer says and argues in the courtroom will definitely be entirely based on and established according to this law. So, even if someone has clearly committed a murder, or perhaps they didn't, in the very end, the alleged murderer might be found innocent by law. There are indeed cases like this. Also, in some Western prisons, between judges, lawyers, and prison wardens, there are still some what we call profit-sharing arrangements or financial interests and benefits. For example, if I want to establish and build this particular prison facility, then in the future, some juvenile offenders, even though their actual crimes clearly don't truly warrant physical imprisonment, but because they truly have their own various and diverse motives, in the end, the total number of people within the prison must be sufficiently comprehensive to meet their diverse and evolving requirements. This kind of phenomenon also undeniably exists across various contexts. No matter the specific country or the particular group of individuals, in fact, laws and regulations are also created and established by people. Since they're made by people, if there is truly no morality or any compassion at all, when personal interests are involved, all kinds of things can happen, especially when there are direct threats to individuals. At such times, things can indeed change significantly and unexpectedly. Therefore, we might, including various departments or certain specific groups, frequently find that established rules and regulations are very important and crucial for maintaining order and stability. Without clear rules and established principles, a group cannot truly grow into a united and progressive community because it will lack the discipline, motivation, and shared direction that inspire people to work together, encourage one another, and continuously move forward toward higher goals. But if there is no humanity at all in the entire world, there will still be certain difficulties that we will face. But just like in the past, like Emperor Renzong of Song, it is widely said that among the many emperors of that particular time, he was truly exceptional. He was a particularly compassionate person. Back then, the Song dynasty often fought numerous wars with the powerful Liao dynasty, and there were a great many significant battles. It seems UFA was from the Song dynasty at that time, and there are many stories about their frequent wars. our former Chinese teacher. He used to tell stories about UFA every day. At the time, his storytelling was really captivating, but now I can't remember any of it. Every time he started talking about UFA, sometimes we would joke and say, was he the reincarnation of UFA? It was as if he was recalling his own past life. He had a lot of symbolic interpretations indeed, things that weren't obvious at all in the books. He would point them out, sometimes, especially at moments when he becomes extremely excited and passionate. He will even climb up onto the teacher's desk during the lecture, sitting right there on the platform while continuing to deliver his talk. He would often sit upon the podium, treating it much like a sacred Dharma seat, as he then began to speak to the assembled audience. At that time, Emperor Renzong of Song was the same way. Back then, with the Liu dynasty, over the course of about 40 years, they were originally enemy states. But after he came to power, there wasn't a single conflict between them. Later, when he died, the king of Liao was extremely saddened, as if he had lost a family member. He didn't just talk about the big events, but even the smallest details. There were so many interesting stories to tell. It is said that once upon a time, he went out for a leisurely walk. When he embarked on this walk, he journeyed quite a considerable distance. Of course, as a revered monarch, there were indeed many loyal people following closely behind him. No matter what kind of leader you are, there are always all kinds of people following behind. But as he was walking along, he kept looking back many, many times at the attendants who were behind him. Then he just kept on walking. When he eventually came back, he told his concubine, "I was especially thirsty this time when I went out. Please hurry and get me some fresh, cool water to drink immediately." His concubine replied, "You're such a great monarch. When you go out, is there really no one here at all to provide you with water? You bring so many people along with you." He said, "I looked at everyone just now, and I noticed something quite interesting. Not a single person brought water for me." I didn't say anything. Otherwise, if I had said something, maybe they all would have been punished. So I didn't say anything at all. I just patiently endured it and waited until I got back to finally drink some water. Actually, this is just a very small, almost insignificant detail, but perhaps when someone is in a truly high position, it's hard to say whether they can really do this. Once, while he was carefully eating his meal, he unexpectedly found some gritty sand within his food, but he immediately and discreetly hid them away from view. He told the people around him, "You must not tell anyone else about this." Otherwise, if the matter had been made public at that time, the cook could very likely have been sentenced to death and even beheaded, because under the system of that era, it was considered extremely dangerous. The rules at that time could be extremely strict, requiring that everything connected to the monarch be treated with the utmost respect, and so there were many such behaviors and practices expected of people. As a monarch, someone in his position should ideally govern by convincing people through the power of reason or by winning their hearts through the strength of moral virtue, and he was like that. Moreover, whether it was governing the whole country or managing his entire dynasty, he was considered quite successful. But to us, when it comes to actually trying to accomplish something of this kind in real life, we must admit that it is extremely difficult and rarely possible to succeed. No matter what the situation, morality is still very much important. So both morality and established rules and their adherence, in our current society, these principles are indeed profoundly needed and highly relevant in both respects. This includes, for instance, when we manage diverse groups of people. On one hand, there needs to be a very strict and clearly defined system in place. And on the other hand, we must treat each person because, after all, a system is just words made by people, and there are things it doesn't cover. There used to be a steward in a monastery, and they made their very own rules. What kind of rules exactly? From then on, everyone in the monastery, if they hit someone, regardless of whether they were right or wrong, if someone was hit and bled, that particular person had to be expelled. Later, the steward accidentally, the very people who had originally set these rules, they unintentionally hit someone and caused significant bleeding. The steward had personally made the rule himself, so he was compelled to expel himself. In the end, they had to carefully adjust their rules once again. It became a real hassle going back and forth. So when it actually happens to yourself, then this is quite a kind of pain. But when it truly happens to someone else, however, you feel that rules are necessary. So sometimes as leaders, or indeed so-called monarchs, we must consider our roles and responsibilities. You think there must be certain things in place. But if you haven't put yourself in others' shoes, if you haven't thought about it and it happens to you. We Tibetans have a saying, that is indeed a lot of pain, like moxa sticks on your clothes. It's quite different from traditional moxa sticks applied directly on your skin. If you were to rub a burning moxa stick directly onto your bare skin, ouch, it would really truly hurt. But if it's on your clothing, it certainly doesn't cause any pain. So when it happens to someone else, you might not truly feel it until the moment it actually happens to you personally, and then the pain is especially intense. So all of these rules and laws exist for regulating our lives, If we don't have a way to exchange perspectives with others, or to think from others' perspectives and points of view, and to only rely on our own personal interests, or to use our own inherent power to make these particular rules and regulations, in the end, you might very well end up caught in this intricate web yourself. Only then will you truly realize, oh, some of these rules are actually quite cruel and unjust. You will come to understand it yourself. So that's what I talked about earlier. Now moving on, it appears time is up. But let's finish this biography of Confucius today. The following section is Confucius's own autobiography. What comes next is about this. How time flies. Here's precisely how it typically goes, because this particular sentence, I've also thoroughly talked about it in some other relevant classes. I think this is still very meaningful for our lives. It's truly quite significant indeed. There are only 38 characters here, but in these, Confucius's entire life has already been expressed. Confucius didn't leave behind an autobiography, just these 38 characters, but actually that's enough, because he talked about his life from age 15 to 70. And finally, at the age of 72, he peacefully left this world, leaving behind a lifetime of memories. So it can still be considered an autobiography. Previously, regarding Aristotle and his biographical account, other people said it was simply, I was born into this world, I worked and labored, I lived my life, I worked and labored again, I died. These few simple words were considered to be the biography of his entire lifetime and existence. There is this kind of saying as well. So in this way, what we see here is Confucius himself famously stated, at 15, indeed by the age of 15 he had already dedicated himself wholeheartedly to the pursuit of profound learning and knowledge. He talked about each stage, each spanning a decade, a summary like this. He first began to pursue his learning at the age of 15 years old. Some people might say that starting to study at 15 is nothing particularly special. It's the same for us nowadays. At 15 we're still in school, so that's quite normal. But actually, it was a bit different back then. Because of his family situation and the state of society, in fact, at the tender age of just 15, to possess such a profound aspiration for learning, to hold such a lofty ideal, was actually very rare indeed. Therefore, Confucius, at a very young age, you could say at the age of 15, he already had an especially grand ambition. He had a great love for learning, because from the context of the Analects, this is also evident. It's also quite apparent in many other ancient historical texts and documents. Confucius was not only interested in life itself, but also in society, nature, and even military affairs and management. He was eager to learn about everything. But this profound passion for continuous learning truly started from the tender age of 15. The other day at our school, I clearly told those young children, you are already in middle school now. If you still don't have any particular ambitions at this point, then it seems that many kids nowadays don't have dreams. Whatever their parents say is fine for them. They ask, teacher, which school should I try? Or what should I aim for? Now they're 17 or 18 and still have no ambitions at all. I just asked the principal a question. Now we have students numbering close to nearly 1,000 people in our school. What about their ideals and aspirations? He said the most heartbreaking and saddening thing is that they have no ideals or dreams. They all feel and believe that as long as they have some job in the future, that's enough, just like that. Maybe back in our day, when I was 15 years old, I was still diligently herding yaks. Just last year, I talked about this at a school. Back then, what exactly was my dream? I was determined to be like our neighbor Akalunju, who was really good at herding yaks. Everyone admired him. I felt that I must become just like him. And so at that time, my greatest dream and personal aspiration was also shaped in exactly the same way. But honestly, for many kids nowadays, I also said that day, it's best for you now to think about whether you want to be an artist or a doctor or something else. A lot of people just think it would be best if I could become a civil servant. Other than that, it seems like many don't really have any ambitions. Actually, that's understandable, because whether it's being a civil servant, a doctor, or a teacher, the number of those positions is limited. But now, it seems like a lot of kids are kind of like that. So when Confucius reached the tender age of 15, he already possessed this truly remarkable and profoundly wonderful aspiration of never tiring of learning and continuously seeking knowledge. In fact, throughout Confucius's life, he first set his mind on diligently pursuing knowledge, then on earnestly seeking benevolence, and on truly seeking the way. At the beginning, he was primarily focused on learning, and then he continuously pursued the study of benevolence. As well as morality and profound wisdom, this was indeed his overarching philosophy. He established this starting from the age of 15. Then at 30, he stood firm. Here he does not mention the age of 20, but instead he starts from 15. Why does he not mention the age of 20? When I first read this, I also wondered about it. From that point on, the milestones all come in decades. There is no 15-year marker at all. As the Analects puts it, at 30, one stands firm. So by the time he turned 30, you could say he had found his footing, what we call the time to establish a family and career. Or you could say that at the significant age of 30, his profound wisdom would not waver or change in any discernible or substantial way, remaining steadfast and unwavering. It should be that what he had learned was already solid and stable. His own outlook on life and values all have a very clear and precise direction. By this particular point in time, they have already been firmly established. That's precisely why, nowadays, it is common to see many people in the Han region will say, you're almost 30, hurry up. You still haven't started your own family yet. Confucius said, at 30 one stands firm. So standing firm at 30 also means that by the age of 30, you must establish your own true direction for the future. This might also be related to that. Then comes at 40, no longer confused. The earlier part mainly refers to the significant period from the age of 15 to 30, encompassing his own personal studies and various important aspects of his life. Then, when he reaches 40, because between 30 and 40, he already started a family and established a career. He has seen all kinds of phenomena in society and has witnessed quite a lot. Some things he can accept, while others he cannot. And for those things he cannot accept, it's easy for us to develop feelings of anger and resentment. For the things he can accept, he develops attachment and desire, what we often refer to as greed, anger, and ignorance. These desires of greed, anger, and ignorance are easily generated. But by the time he reaches 40, he is no longer manipulated by various emotions. External circumstances no longer tempt him. At that point, he should already have, regarding the whole of society and all these various external phenomena, he possesses a particularly profound and comprehensive understanding. His deeply held views are not easily swayed or influenced. He certainly won't be happy one moment and miserable the next. He won't be like that. He is not at all confused, not at all bewildered, and certainly won't be led astray by any afflictions whatsoever. Of course, there are indeed different ways to interpret this particular statement, but from what I've personally seen in many commentaries, people just tend to say whatever comes to their mind without much thought. So I also just say whatever comes to my mind quite freely and openly, because there isn't really any truly fixed tradition for this particular aspect either. I've personally seen so many different kinds of people, and each and every one of them explains it according to their own unique ideas and interpretations. Then, after another 10 years, at the age of 50, it is said that one knows the mandate of heaven. Some say that it's because at that time he began to study the Book of Changes, and having understood the mandate of heaven, he could tell fortunes. That's one interpretation. But I truly think, perhaps if he genuinely understands his ultimate destiny, when an individual reaches the significant age of 50, whether it's their entire outlook on life or their profound sense of mission, it becomes clearer. They might attain a higher level of awareness in life, a much deeper level of understanding. Indeed, when a person truly reaches the age of 50, whether it's about the laws of cause and effect or about life itself, there is a truly new kind of profound insight. So at this significant time, one comes to fully know the profound mandate of heaven. Confucius himself only truly understood the mandate of heaven at the mature age of 50. For those of us who study Buddhism, we probably don't really need to wait until we are 50 years old, right? Still, at a certain point in time regarding cause and effect and also retribution, because nowadays many young people are indeed quite confused and uncertain, but especially for those who study Buddhism, they should have a clearer understanding of the happiness and suffering in their own lives. Many things are relatively clear to them. It's not necessarily required to wait until 50, but here it is said to be at 50. At 60, one's ear is obedient. When a person reaches 60, some people say Confucius had hearing problems before, and then at 60, his hearing became smooth. But this explanation is incorrect, because when a person reaches 60, their hearing gets worse. So it's unclear how this obedience comes about. Ear obedience refers to our perception and awareness. The phenomena we personally see and hear, what we see is basically what we directly perceive, so there isn't much confusion about it. But what we hear, some things we can accept, and some things we can't accept. There are all kinds of situations. This means that by then, regarding the outside world, regarding society, regarding others' discussions, comments, and all sorts of phenomena about you, at this point when a person reaches 60 years old, they've already seen and heard so much. They've experienced so many things. At this particular stage, they simply go with the natural flow. They can easily follow the inherent natural order of all things in existence. At this time, they no longer blame heaven or others. They've reached this kind of state, you could say. It's what we often refer to as unmoved by the eight winds, a state of profound and enduring tranquility. By then, they've already reached 60 years old. Actually, when many people reach 60, they do have a certain level of attainment. But for some, it might not necessarily be a true state of realization, because by that time, the six senses have all already declined. It's not like when you're young, in your 20s or 30s. When you're in your 20s or 30s, all your loves and hates are very clear-cut. You insist that things must be a certain way. And if they're not, you truly feel like you absolutely have to stake your entire life on your definitive answer. But when a person reaches 60, except for a few who are truly muddle-headed, most people are basically like great, truly accomplished ones. Oh, you might think this person must have a very high level of spiritual attainment. But actually, it's not that their spiritual attainment is so high. At that age, because of age itself, and also due to the overall, in fact, truly, I feel that I really agree with Confucius's division of ages. I still find it to be quite valid and applicable. This is because everyone's individual situation might be different and unique. In this way, attachment to society and the mundane world, looking at places like Japan nowadays, the suicide rate among men is relatively higher. It tends to be more common among people in their 50s and 60s. According to international statistics, this may be due to family pressure or perhaps because of greater social pressure. And then in some other countries, the suicide rate among women is also relatively high, especially in many countries among people in their 20s and 30s when they are young regarding relationships and careers. Some people just can't figure things out and end up committing suicide. And in some countries, elderly people, when they have no one to keep them company, feel very lonely, and there are also some suicides. Actually, if we understand these phenomena, each of us should have a different perspective on life. If we can develop different understandings, we can at least say that we wouldn't choose so-called suicide or violence. These things probably wouldn't happen, especially for those of us who study Buddhism. I truly think in this regard it's very beneficial. Among ordinary Buddhists, the phenomenon of truly wanting to commit suicide or self-harm is extremely rare. I can't say it doesn't exist. After all, Buddhists are still sentient beings in the desire realm. They have all kinds of afflictions like greed, anger, and ignorance, pain, fear. These all exist. But for most people, they have a clear understanding of the law of cause and effect, and these relationships, especially if they practice in this area, it might be even better. Therefore, Confucius indeed said that at the age of 60 years old, one is relatively at ease with everything, with the mandate of heaven as a whole. Earlier, it was knowing the mandate of heaven. Here, some say it truly means going along with the divine mandate of heaven, a profound concept. Whatever the mandate of heaven is, he will follow it. When one reaches the age of 50, there are no longer many significant demands on life, and people tend to become more tolerant. Generally, when we interact with individuals in their 60s, they are easier to get along with, except for a very few individuals. It's still fine, just a very few exceptions. Otherwise, in Buddhist logic, it wouldn't be universal, right? And then 70. What is 70 like? At 70, one follows one's heart's desires without overstepping the bounds. At 70, he does whatever he wants, doing whatever he feels like doing. But generally, he doesn't break the rules. But it's hard to say. Look at the US President Trump. Sometimes he says this, sometimes he says that. Sometimes it's like that too. Does that count as not overstepping the bounds? Maybe he has his own principles. But in any case, here it says, when one reaches the age of 70, He might still have many of his own personal ideas and thoughts, but this does not mean that he would overstep the proper boundaries, because everything he does could naturally accord with the subtle harmony of the Tao. Whether this is truly the case is hard to say, yet in reality, when a person reaches the age of 70, such an understanding often arises. They should have a new understanding of all things in nature, a completely new perspective, so to speak, offering a fresh viewpoint. Of course, in the past, reaching 70 was considered quite a remarkably long life. Now, perhaps because of significant advances in modern medicine and various other significant differences from what was observed before, people may live even longer lives. But what is being discussed here is that specifically before the age of 40, it talks about Confucius's general and overarching ideas and philosophical thoughts. Then after 50, there is some analysis. He might develop certain beliefs and reach different states of mind, but these states of mind are not necessarily passed on to his disciples. The later stages of Confucius' long and influential life, his life became more carefree and more in harmony with nature. So it seems that he attained certain states of mind, and some people, when analyzing him, see it this way as well. Because when people reach the later stages of life, much of what they do simply follows the natural course of things, and they no longer feel the need to violate rules or push against boundaries. Of course, this is only my personal view. Everyone has their own way of interpreting this. In any case, I truly hope that each and every one of us can make some general and fundamental choices about the direction of our lives, or, in other words, that you can effectively summarize the entire narrative of life for yourself. For instance, you might ask, what kind of person was I like during the significant period from 10 to 20 years old? What was I like from 20 to 30? And then from 30 to 40 years of age? For many of us Buddhists, some people say, back then I was really confused and obsessed with many things, and my values on many things now seem very unclear to me. Some people have this thought. Some people feel, I was very wise at that time, but now they're more confused. Why? There are people who say this too. So when it comes to yourself, how old are you now? I don't know. Are you older or younger than Confucius? No matter what, when it comes to this isn't something you say to others, what your own personal life is truly and genuinely like, and what it will be like in the future. As practitioners, no matter what, however long our lives may truly and genuinely indeed be, we should also look at our own lives in roughly 10-year segments as a kind of rule. Summing things up in segments like this is also very good and quite effective. When you have some free time, I also ask everyone to take a moment to reflect deeply on how you would summarize your entire life in distinct 10-year segments, considering how you would sum it up. When it is convenient, I might ask you about this profound exercise. Everyone should also take some time to think about it. It's not just about knowing what you did in each 10-year period, or where exactly you worked during those entire 10 years, or the fact that you changed jobs 10 separate times in those 10 years. Even so, this can still profoundly reveal your underlying mindset, but simply dividing your life into distinct segments like this isn't quite enough. You need to reflect on why things turned out that way. For example, when you were 30, what kind of ideals did you have? By the time you were 40, how did you view life? And what about the future? There are probably many aspects we should consider. As Buddhists, we should also genuinely care about our own lives and well-being and take a moment to carefully look at how things are truly going. So what are your plans for the future? Whether it's spreading the Dharma and benefiting sentient beings, what kind of aspirations do you have in this regard? What are your ambitions? And this is also something worth reflecting on. All right, we'll stop here for today.
Sonamdei tamse progaya tonne jana pase kirgana jirano chupai chupun solen droja
Bandangara badna sadarda Bandangara badna sadarda Bandangara badna sadarda